You can't do this. This is completely unacceptable. You forged these documents.
If you look at the easement schedule, page 3 clearly states the boundary lines.
Where is the money, Linda? What did you do with the funds?
You can't hide from this! No, don't look at me. She handled the accounts. I just signed where she told me.
It's all Linda. She's the one responsible for the missing funds.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney.
I pulled up to my lake mansion at dawn and watched a wrecking ball swallow 22 years of my life. The cab glass shook, my hands shook, and the foreman didn't. He pointed at a forged HOA lien and said, "You're part of the association now." They weren't just tearing down rooms, they crushed my late wife's piano so hard the keys exploded into the grass like broken teeth. If you're watching, pause and tell me where you're from, because in the next few minutes, you're gonna see what real ownership looks like when the wrong people pick the wrong fight. They thought I was another quiet neighbor. They didn't know I used to run fire scenes, audit contracts, and buy paper that controls entire neighborhoods. They also didn't know I owned the one thing that could end their game in a single phone call. Stay with me, because if anyone's ever tried to trample your home with fake power, this is the blueprint to take it back. I'd been gone 6 weeks in an old RV, visiting my daughter and grandkids. The gravel on my private drive should have been the sound of peace. Instead, I smelled diesel and drywall dust, the scent of disaster I knew from a lifetime as a fire chief. The excavator's arm rested in the ribs of my living room, the lake staring through a jagged hole where my kitchen had been. One wall still stood, cocked like a tombstone. Under the rubble, I saw that piano, the one I'd saved up to buy for our 25th anniversary, splintered into silence. I didn't shout. Shock wipes your vocabulary. I just walked, slow, toward the man with the clipboard who dared to call this legal. "Notices were posted 3 times, he said, bored. "You're in arrears. HOA dues. Late fees. Demo approved." I told him plainly, I was never in an HOA. My 12 acres were carved out of their tract by survey and deed long before Heron Creek Estates existed. Iron stakes, separate parcel, separate taxes. He smirked like smirking was a job. You are now. That line told me everything. This wasn't a mistake. It was a land grab dressed as governance. I called a stop to the machines and started pulling paper, mailbox, 2 envelopes. One demanded nearly $3,000. The other showed meeting minutes with a paragraph circled in red, a vote to retroactively annex my land for aesthetic cohesion. That's not law. That's fantasy stapled to intimidation. Here's where it gets spicy. While they built that subdivision years ago, their developer tried to buy me out. I refused. We negotiated hard boundaries, filed them, and I kept my lake frontage. When the market dipped 2 years back, their developer defaulted on a note. Most folks don't read foreclosure lists for fun. I do. I bought the distressed paper through a clean little LLC, and with it came the crown jewel, the declarant rights. Those are the developer powers that trump the HOA board until they expire or transfer. Translation: I quietly acquired the legal steering wheel of their entire covenant system, including the power to approve, amend, and in limited windows dissolve. Oh, and one more thing. 20 years earlier, I'd purchased the lakebed and the dam parcel from the original rancher's estate. Riparian rights, spillway control, the boat ramp land, the pump house easement. The HOA's views hang on property I own in fee simple. I know what you're thinking. Why not show your cards right there? Because you only draw the ace when it counts. First, I documented everything, timestamps, drone video of the equipment on my parcel, VINs, contractor names, insurance carriers off the side of their trucks. If you're taking notes at home, write this down. Document before you detonate. Next, I called 3 numbers: County Building Inspector, Stop Work Authority, Sheriff Criminal Impersonation divided by forgery, and my insurance carrier's large loss adjuster, subrogation hammer. Then I called the only lawyer I've kept on speed dial since my wife passed, a clean and mean real property litigator who treats covenants like math problems. The inspector arrived first, took one look at the permit, and went gray. Wrong parcel number, wrong legal description, no owner signature. He radioed in a stop work order and posted it in big, unmissable letters. The crew went quiet. The foreman tried to waive a resolution signed by the HOA president, Karen, of course. The inspector tapped the code book. An HOA doesn't greenlight demolition on land it doesn't own. The sheriff rolled up next, took my statement, and bagged the annexation minutes as evidence. Felony forgery isn't a policy dispute, it's a perp walk with paperwork. While they froze in my driveway, I opened a hardened briefcase on my tailgate and laid out originals: the deed to my parcel, the metes and bounds survey with iron pins plotted, the lakebed deed, the dam parcel, and the assignment of declarant rights stamped and recorded after the developer's default. Karen strolled over with a smirk she must have practiced in the mirror. I spun the documents toward the inspector and sheriff and tapped the assignment. This is the steering wheel you've been pretending to hold. You don't own the lake, the ramp, or the spillway. Your board's authority runs inside your tract lines, not across mine. Also, your covenants still list declarant consent as a prerequisite for amendments. Guess who the declarant is? Karen blinked like a stage light hit her face. The sheriff asked her if she'd like to make a statement. She said, "My lawyer will speak for me," which is how you say "I'm in trouble" in 5 words. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to fix what they broke and make the rules honest again. I called a meeting, not her HOA's clubhouse. My meeting in the volunteer fire hall I helped fund. I posted a notice everywhere. Emergency neighborhood briefing, property rights, water rights, and what your board didn't tell you. I invited the county attorney, the title company that insured the developer's plat, and every neighbor who'd been threatened over mailboxes and lawn height. The room was shoulder to shoulder. Some came angry, some afraid. Most embarrassed they'd let a bully put a collar on them. I started simple. This is my deed. These are your covenants. This, I held up the assignment, is the document your developer filed when they needed cash. It made me the declarant. That means your board needed my consent to annex anything. They didn't have it. I showed the lakebed deed, the easements for the ramp and pump. If anyone told you they control the lake, they lied. Your right to use it comes through licenses I can grant or revoke. I don't want to revoke. I want respect and repairs. A hand shot up. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Fair question. Because good fences are quiet until someone starts moving posts, I said. I don't want to rule you. I want to live next to people who read the rules they signed. I pulled up a slide. Yes, I made slides showing how Karen's board voted to annex me while I was out of state, then hired a demolition crew based on a forged permit. The county attorney stepped in and explained the penalties for filing fraudulent instruments. The room shifted. Fear changed teams. Here's where power becomes a pen. I issued, as declarant, a temporary suspension of the board's enforcement authority pending a compliance audit. That's not a tantrum, it's a remedy written into their own documents. I appointed a neutral administrator, the title company's senior counsel, to review fines, liens, and contracts. I required a bond sufficient to rebuild my house as a condition of any further HOA action. If you're wondering, can you really do that? Yes, when the documents give you the keys and the board tried to drive through a wall. Then I turned to the part they didn't expect, making people whole. I created a restoration fund seeded with an advance from my insurance carrier's subrogation claim and a short-term line of credit secured by the HOA's common area parcel. Why? Because the common area was free and clear, and the board's insurer was about to light up with exposure. The fund would pay to rebuild my home, to code, better than before, replace my wife's piano with the same model and serial era, and reimburse neighbors for illegal fines. The administrator would manage it, not me. Transparency beats revenge. Karen? She lawyered up fast. The foreman, facing charges, gave a sworn statement about who hired him and what papers he was handed. The board's treasurer flipped next. sliding a thumb drive across a table that turned out to be full of emails about pushing annexation while he's gone and fast-tracking demo before appeal. The county prosecutor convened a grand jury. I didn't celebrate. I went back to the lake at sunrise and skimmed ash from the water because the smell clung to everything, and I needed it gone. Construction started 2 months later. I hired the same framing crew that helped me raise the original beams, men who still remembered where we set that first ridge. I laid the new foundation 3 inches thicker and ran power on isolated circuits the way I always wanted. In a quiet ceremony with close friends, we set a new piano in the living room, a restored twin of the one they broke. I lifted the fallboard and pressed a single key. The note rang out over the water like it had been waiting for permission to come home. The neighborhood changed. Without Karen's fear machine, people stopped policing each other and started helping. We rewrote the worst parts of the covenants in daylight with council present, striking the junk that made flags and flower pots a war. We added a clause that forbids any annexation without unanimous consent of the affected owners and declarant sign-off, yes, I signed, then immediately recorded a sunset on my own declarant powers. Authority is safest when it can end. We also formalized the truth about the lake, licensed use, posted safety rules, and a maintenance plan funded by modest, transparent dues that go where they're supposed to. If you're still with me, here's your takeaway. Ownership is more than a deed in a drawer. It's easements, water rights, access roads, and the fine print that says who gets to hold the pen. Karen tried to win with noise. I answered with paper that talks louder, recorded, notarized, time-stamped. You don't have to be a lawyer to defend your ground. You need 3 things: receipts, patience, and the nerve to call a lie in a room full of people who wanted to believe it. Drop a comment with your city. If enough of you ask, I'll pin a starter checklist for fighting bad boards without burning down your block. Oh, and that one thing I teased that gave me total control, it wasn't just the declarant rights, it was the dam. The spillway gate on this lake sits on my little triangle of land. When they thought fines could force me to kneel, I could have locked down every dock and boat ramp with a single notice of suspended access for safety inspection. I didn't do it, because punishment doesn't build neighbors, but I made sure they understood the lever. Power, used carefully, teaches faster than speeches. Once they saw the fulcrum, the threats stopped writing themselves. Months later, we held a quiet gathering on the rebuilt porch. No speeches, no drama. Tamara from Lot 18 brought a pie. Ed from Lot 6, who used to count mailbox violations, showed up with folding chairs and a soft apology. We sat, listened to the lake, breathed, and let the piano fill the gaps between sentences. Nobody looked over their shoulder for a clipboard. Nobody asked permission to be human. The house stood stronger than before. The neighborhood did too. If someone ever stands on your lawn waving forged power, remember this day. The wrecking ball took my walls. It didn't touch my claim. When you know what you own and why you don't have to shout, you show the deed, you show the code, you post the bond, and you make them build what they broke. That's real ownership. That's how you turn a smirk into silence. And if this story lit a fire in you, hit subscribe. Next time, I'll show you how I bought a developer's note for pennies and turned it into peace for 1,000 people without swinging a single hammer. My hands were trembling not from fear, but from a cold, surgical kind of fury. You know that moment when something inside you snaps, but not in a loud way? Quiet. Controlled. Like a switch being flipped. That was me, sitting in the RV, staring at the ashes of my home through the cracked windshield. They hadn't just stolen my property, they had declared war on the idea of ownership itself. I wasn't just fighting for lumber and nails. I was fighting for my wife's memory, for the years spent building every beam by hand, for the damn piano they smashed without a second thought. And as I sat there, phone still hot in my hand from the call with the county clerk, I realized something. They had no idea who they were up against. I'd spent 30 years as a fire chief learning how to read a scene. You walk into chaos, and you don't ask who's crying, you ask what burned first. Every disaster has a point of origin, and this one had a signature, literally. They forged mine. sloppy, too clean, no pen pressure, no stroke rhythm, no natural hesitation of muscle memory. It was a digital ghost of me, printed at 2 in the morning by someone who thought I'd never check metadata. Rookie mistake. You can fake a signature, but you can't fake the timestamps of creation. And those timestamps pointed straight at one name, Linda R., HOA president, fraud architect, queen of Heron Creek's suburban empire. I took another breath, opened my laptop, and began laying out evidence the way I used to lay out fire scene diagrams, clean, methodical, color-coded. Left screen, the forged demolition permit. Right screen, my genuine 2014 roofing permit. I aligned the signatures, toggled transparency, and watched the overlay snap into perfect alignment, identical down to the pixel. It wasn't handwriting, it was a scan. Whoever did this had lifted my digital signature from an archived file in the county system and pasted it onto a demolition order like a sticker. You can't call that a clerical error. That's computer fraud under State Code Section 3914114. I knew the law well enough to quote it, and this wasn't just state, it was federal, too, because it involved interstate cloud servers. When you've spent your life putting out fires, you learn how to light one the right way. I sent 3 emails, one to my insurance adjuster, one to the county district attorney's office, and one to a contact at the local news outlet I'd trained with during emergency briefings. Subject line: HOA demolishes wrong property using forged county documents. I attached the permit, metadata logs, and screenshots of the HOA's own website showing they had no jurisdiction over my parcel. I knew how stories like this spread. People hate corruption, but they love arrogance caught on tape, and the HOA had arrogance in spades. Before the day ended, I drove to the edge of the wreckage with my drone case. The machine whirred to life, buzzing over the ruins, recording every inch of damage in crisp 4 kelvins. Every smashed rafter, every flattened wall, every key from that piano scattered like bones. I narrated into the mic, steady, factual, unemotional, like a deposition with wings. When I replayed the footage, I noticed something small but crucial. On the side of one bulldozer, a logo. Lakeview Contracting LLC. That was the contractor's name, and I knew enough to start digging. I ran a quick corporate lookup through the state registry. Lakeview Contracting was registered under a parent company called Rosell Development Group. My blood went cold. Rosell. Same last name as Linda. That was the nail. The HOA president hadn't just authorized the demolition, she'd hired her own family's company to do it. That meant double fraud, falsified authorization, and self-dealing in contract procurement. I didn't need to raise my voice or break anything. I just smiled, clicked print, and added another sheet to my growing case file titled Point of Origin. But revenge isn't just about paperwork, it's about control. I wasn't going to storm into their HOA office screaming, I was going to choke them with their own bylaws. I pulled up the Heron Creek covenants, conditions and restrictions, CC&Rs, that bloated document they all signed without reading. 68 pages of micromanagement about mailbox colors and acceptable grass height. Buried in Article 14, Section 4 was something called a Declarant Authority Clause. That clause granted the original land developer the power to override any HOA decision regarding annexation or property inclusion for 20 years after filing. I checked the timeline. That clause was still active, and the developer who built Heron Creek, he'd gone bankrupt 3 years ago. Guess who bought that distressed note for pennies when it hit the auction? Me. I had almost forgot. I bought the note originally to keep speculators off my back. But now, it meant I legally inherited the declarant authority. The HOA couldn't annex me without my consent. Their forged vote wasn't just unethical, it was void from the moment it was signed. I was the final legal gatekeeper of their entire community. They'd built their little kingdom on my lake, and now I held the crown they didn't even know existed. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ruined skyline of my once beautiful home. I wasn't powerless, I was patient. There's a difference. I drafted one final document before sunset, a formal notice of cease and desist of declarant authority violation, citing their unlawful annexation, forgery, and demolition trespass. I attached the evidence, notarized it at the county courthouse, and copied both the sheriff and the DA. That notice wasn't just a warning, it was a fuse. At nightfall, my inbox started blinking. First, from the county attorney, "We've received your documentation. Please be available for a follow-up interview tomorrow." Then from a local journalist, "Mr. Whitaker, this story is unbelievable. We'd like to verify the footage and interview you on camera." I smiled, closing the laptop as the generator hummed. Out on the dark water, the moon's reflection trembled in the ripples like a heartbeat. The next morning, I drove into town. Every stoplight felt heavier. I walked into the county administration building, carrying a binder thick enough to make a lawyer blush. When I told the clerk my name, her eyes widened. "You're the guy with the lake house," she whispered. "The one they tore down." I nodded once. Not for long. She led me to a small conference room where 2 county officials and a deputy were waiting. I laid out the printed documents, permits, metadata, forum screenshots, contractor records. As I spoke, the room grew quieter. One of them muttered, This is criminal." I corrected him. "No, this is personal, and I'm going to make sure it becomes public." By noon, the sheriff's office had already contacted the state licensing board to suspend Lakeview Contracting's demolition license pending investigation. The DA's office issued a subpoena for the HOA's meeting records. The dominoes were falling. And through it all, Linda hadn't called, hadn't emailed, hadn't shown her smug face, but I knew she would. Bullies always do when they realize their leash just snapped. That night, parked beside the lake, I poured a glass of bourbon and stared at the outline of my destroyed home. The moon hung low, turning the twisted beams silver. My RV smelled like coffee, paper, and vengeance. I whispered to the dark water, "You thought you could erase me, but I own the ground you're standing on." The fire chief in me had found the point of origin. Now, all that was left was to trace the fire back to the source and let it burn clean. I waited until the last agenda item, new business, because bullies like Linda get sloppy when they think the room is already theirs. When she asked for comments, I stood, slow and polite, the way you do at a funeral. "Name for the record?" she chirped. "Jack Whitaker," I said. The room stirred. She froze for half a heartbeat, then pasted on that HOA smile. "Mr. Whitaker, this is a members' meeting." I held up a manila envelope. "And this is a criminal file." I walked to the front and placed 20 neatly bound packets on the table, one for each board member, the manager, and any resident who wanted truth heavier than gossip. "That's the forged demolition permit you filed, metadata included. That's the inspection report with the inspector's own name misspelled. That's the drone survey proving a sound foundation. And that," I tapped the last page, "is a copy of the county map showing you never had jurisdiction over my parcel." A nervous laugh escaped someone in the second row. Linda didn't blink. "This is harassment. Please return to your seat." I kept my voice level. "No, Linda, this is a record." I clicked my little audio recorder on the lectern beside her gavel and addressed the room, not the board. "If you've paid a fine to keep the peace, raise your hand." 4 hands went up, then 8, then nearly every hand in the room. People shifted, ashamed and angry at the same time. "Good," I said softly. "Now you understand motive." I looked back to Linda. "You'll tell us the county condemned my home. The county says otherwise. You'll say, I authorized demolition. My signature was lifted from a 2014 roofing permit and pasted onto your order at 2:27 a.m. from a home computer registered to Linda R." The treasurer flipped pages with shaking fingers. This can't be authenticated." I smiled without warmth. "Already is. Sheriff's office has the originals. The district attorney has the chain of custody. Lakeview Contracting's license is under emergency review." A murmur swelled. Someone asked, "Lakeview?" I nodded. "Owned by Roselle Development Group." Heads turned to Linda like magnets, color drained from her face. Conflict of interest isn't a policy violation, I added. It's a chargeable scheme when coupled with forgeries and trespass. Linda reached for the gavel like it was a life preserver. Meeting adjourned. I set my palm flat on the packets. Not yet. I pointed to the big screen TV mounted at the back. Stitch Roll Exhibit A. From the doorway, my old friend gave me a curt nod and cast the drone footage from his tablet. The room fell silent as the camera glided over my slab. No stress fractures, no heave, no settlement, then panned to the bulldozer's side panel. Lakeview Contracting LLC, freeze frame, gasps. The next slide showed the CC&Rs, Article 14, Section 4, the Declarant Authority Clause. 20-year window, I said, highlighting the line. Your developer defaulted. I acquired the note. I am the declarant. Your annexation vote wasn't just illegal, it was void. A man in the front row spoke up, voice shaking with relief and anger. So, we've been paying fines to people who didn't have the right to issue them? I didn't soften the blow. Yes, and you're getting that money back. I handed the manager a single-page notice, declarant cease and desist, and temporary suspension of enforcement, pending a third-party audit. Effective now. All citations are frozen. No liens, no threats. An independent administrator will review every dollar. If you were charged illegally, you'll be reimbursed from the board's insurer and recovery from Roselle Development. I let that hang a beat. You weren't the target, you were the cover. Linda went for attack. Grandstanding won't rebuild your shack. I stared through her. You demolished a code-compliant home. You crushed my wife's piano. My voice didn't rise. It settled. You used the county's archive to steal a signature from a dead permit and pasted it onto a live one. That's not HOA business. That's a felony. She tried to speak. I raised a finger. 2 more things, then we're done. I lifted the forged emergency inspection report and circled the name. Bill Johnson doesn't spell his name Johnson. A laugh broke from the back. The sound had an edge. And second, I tapped the projector. Play Exhibit B, the clubhouse filled with Linda's own words, scraped from the old forum she never bothered to scrub. If he won't sell, we'll force a compliance lien. We'll make it make sense. Then a cut to a newer clip, recorded outside Tamara's window, a male voice musing about making an example, a female voice that was unmistakably Linda's, purring, he's about to lose everything. Then he'll leave. The room turned to ice. Linda hissed. Admissibility. I cut in. Save it for the DA. Right on cue, the clubhouse door opened and Sheriff Miller stepped in with 2 deputies. He didn't look at me. He looked at the table. Mrs. Rosiel, we need you to come with us to answer questions about forged public documents and unlawful demolition. Panic punched through the room, shuffling feet, whispered apologies, a chair scraping hard against tile. One of the board members, the treasurer, stood up with both hands in the air. I didn't know. I swear, she said the developer approved. I gave him a way out without giving him a pass. Then help clean it up. Sign the stipulation appointing the independent administrator. Open the books. Turn over every email. He nodded so fast it looked like a shiver. Miller read Linda her rights without theatrics. When the cuffs clicked, the room didn't cheer. It exhaled. I turned to the neighbors. Here's how we fix this without burning the place down. I laid out the steps like an incident command. A 60-day audit, restitution funded by insurance and clawbacks, covenant amendments drafted in the open, a prohibition on annexation without unanimous consent of affected owners and declarant sign-off, a standing rule that no director can hire a company they, their family, or their shell owns. You don't need a tyrant, I said. You need a spine made of process. A gray-haired woman lifted a trembling hand. What about your home? The question sat with me a second. We rebuild, I said. Better. The board's carrier fronts the loss. My insurer subrogates. And when the court finishes, Roselle Development pays the rest. You'll see trucks, not talk. Stitch stepped forward, set his battered hard hat on the table, and placed a set of stamped plans beside it. "Framing crew starts Monday," he said. The room at last made a soft, collective sound that wasn't fear. As people began lining up to add their names to witness lists and audit volunteers, I gathered the remaining packets. My recorder, still blinking, sat by the gavel Linda had tried to hide behind. I picked both up and weighed them in my hands, the symbol and the record. I left the gavel on the table and pocketed the proof. Outside, dusk had set a silver line on the lake. Sheriff Miller paused at the door. "You okay?" I nodded. "Better than yesterday." He squeezed my shoulder. "Hell of a fire you put out." I looked back at the room where neighbors had stopped whispering and started speaking. "No," I said. "We finally found the point of origin." On the drive home, the RV's heater ticking in the cold, I thought of the thumb drive I'd found in the piano lid, my wife smiling into a camera, telling our grandkids that what we build together is forever. The house would rise again. The piano's twin would sit by the window. But more than that, the lie that had marched into our valley with a clipboard and a smirk had met something it couldn't bulldoze. Paper stronger than bravado, a sheriff not for sale, and a neighborhood learning that aesthetic cohesion is not a religion. Tomorrow I'd meet with the administrator, the adjusters, the DA. Tonight I parked by the dark water, listened to the wind in the pines, and, for the first time since the wrecking ball hit, let my hands be still. I didn't raise my voice when I stood. I didn't need to. The room felt the shift the way a lake feels the first gust before a storm. A few heads turned. Then all of them did. "Mr. Whitaker," Linda said, that sharpened classroom tone she uses when she wants you to feel small. "This is a meeting for members." I set a neat stack of packets on the board's table and looked her in the eye. "I'm not here as a member, Linda. I'm here as the owner of the home you illegally demolished." A couple rows back, chairs creaked, paper slid. Indignation flickered across her face and died when she saw page 1, the county map with my parcel, clearly outside Heron Creek's jurisdiction. "These are unverified," she tried. "They're public record," I said, steady. "Page 2 is your demolition permit, signed by me using my 2014 roofing signature you lifted from the county archive. Page 3 is the fake inspection, with the inspector's own name misspelled. A hush fell that wasn't respect, it was fear turning toward truth. I took out the small recorder and held it up the way a medic holds a vial. "But the most important piece isn't on paper," I said, and pressed play. Linda's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. "He thinks he's outside the HOA. We rewrote the boundary map." The gasp was one sound, sharp as a snapped pencil. The older board member pushed his chair back and left without his binder. The HOA lawyer popped up like a jack-in-the-box, suit shiny, voice louder than his confidence. "Privacy violation. Inadmissible. None of this holds up, Mr. Whitaker." I smiled once the dry kind. "That's fine. I'm not going to court. I'm going to title." The lawyer's mouth opened and stayed there. Residents glanced at each other. They knew bylaws. They didn't know bedrock. 20 years ago, I said, I bought what your developer sold to survive bankruptcy. The roadbed beneath your streets, the utility easements, and the mineral rights. Your HOA doesn't own the ground. It borrows it. A lie, Linda snapped, voice a notch shriller. I lifted a deed and an easement schedule. No, an easement. A right to use land you don't own until you violate it. I let that land for a beat. Demolishing the grantor's home on forged authority is what lawyers call a catastrophic breach. Her color drained. The lawyer looked at the carpet like it might help. As of 8 this morning, I continued, my attorney filed termination of all access and utility easements granted to Heron Creek. Heron Creek Lane is a private road, again, my private road. For 48 hours, I'll allow normal in and out. After that, a gate goes in. Plan accordingly. The room broke a dozen voices at once, fear kicking up dust. Mail? School bus? Groceries? I waited, then raised a hand. 3 other changes? I said, and set 3 letters down. Landscaping, private security, and Lakeview Contracting are now trespassers on my road. They've been notified. Their contracts ride on access they no longer have. The direction of anger pivoted like a weather vane in a squall. You knew? Someone barked at Linda. You risked trapping us in our homes? Another voice, smaller, cracked with panic. Our property values. I didn't gloat. I pointed at what happens next. This isn't punishment. It's leverage to force honesty. You'll have open meetings, full audits, and a covenant rewrite in daylight. No more fines by threat. No more annexation without unanimous consent of affected owners and sign-off from the declarant. The lawyer stiffened. There is no declarant. There is, I said, tapping the assignment I bought when your developer defaulted. Me. In the front row, a man I recognized from Miller's List stood with his wife. Linda denied our wheelchair ramp, he said, voice low. Wrong lumber. I turned so the whole room heard me. Your ramp is a county permit, not Linda's taste. Pull it. Build it. Anyone who tries to stop you on your lot is trespassing. His shoulders dropped like he'd been carrying bricks. The clubhouse door opened. Sheriff Miller stepped in with 2 deputies. Not hurried, not slow, just inevitable. He didn't look at me. He looked at the table. Mrs. Roselle, he said, we need you to come with us to answer questions about forged public documents and unlawful demolition. She drew breath for a speech and found none. The treasurer blurted. She said the developer approved. I didn't save him. I handed him a single page. Sign the stipulation appointing an independent administrator and freezing enforcement. Open your books. Start clean. He grabbed the pen. Miller read rights without drama. Handcuffs clicked. The room didn't cheer, it exhaled. Outside, I heard the start of a storm that wasn't weather. Inside, fear emptied its pockets and found its spine. After the room settled into murmurs and apologies, I laid out an incident command plan, the way we do when smoke still hangs, but the flames are out. 60-day audit, managed by a neutral administrator. Restitution paid from the board's insurer, and clawbacks from Rosiel Development. Covenant amendments cut down to what the law actually needs. No architectural dictatorship, no annexation games. A conflict of interest ban with teeth. A woman raised her hand. And your house? For the first time that night, I let something warm into my voice. We rebuild, I said. Framing starts Monday. Same footprint, stronger bones. Piano by the window again. Stitch, who'd been quiet by the door, set his battered hard hat on the table and slid stamped plans beside it. Crews lined up, he said. The sound that followed wasn't applause. It was relief with a pulse. 2 mornings later, just as the gateposts went in, 2 deputies rolled up with a supervisor I didn't know and a passenger I unfortunately did. Linda, pointing through the windshield, eyes bright with desperation. Sir, the supervisor said, wearily professional, we've had a complaint you're obstructing a public roadway. I invited them into the RV heat on. Coffee poured, paper laid out like a small, tidy trial. Plat maps, title, easement schedules, the forged permit, the fake inspection with Johnson over Johnson, the HOA forum scrape, and the drone stills of a slab that would outlast all of us, the supervisor read. His face moved through disbelief, to anger, to duty. Wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy, he said to no one. He stepped out, radioed long, came back, changed. Mr. Whitaker, this goes past us. Forged instruments, mailings, servers, this is federal. We're looping in the Bureau. Federal attention is not loud, it's thorough. Subpoenas to the HOA's bank, server logs from their web provider. The minutes metadata fingerprint matched Linda's home laptop. Their notary, Angela Myers, folded first, hands shaking, story straight. Linda dictated, she stamped, Lakeview got the job. And a board cut would be reconciled later. Lakeview's licensure went to emergency suspension pending hearings. The corporate tree led straight to Rosiel Development. A quiet week passed like a held breath. Then the most fitting stage appeared. A hastily called emergency meeting. 2 plain sedans out front, Agents inside. Miss Roselle? Handcuffs. No. 5 a.m. Raid. No news chopper, just consequence. Under the fluorescent lights where she'd ruled with a plastic gavel. Civil followed criminal the way smoke follows heat. The HOA's carrier saw the deck and stopped gambling. Settlement, $948,000. $200 replacement. Contents, punitive, fees. Money can't rewind a wrecking ball, but it can buy lumber, trades, and time. I signed, deposited, and converted rage into rebar. We poured the new foundation with a storm shelter and a wide, clean ADA ramp because dignity should never be a special request. We set a twin of my wife's piano in the same light by the same window. The first note I pressed hung in the air the way a promise hangs when you mean it. It didn't fix everything. It fixed enough to start. The neighborhood did something brave. They didn't swap one tyrant for another. They dissolved the machine that hurt them and built a small thing in its place that did only what roads require. We drafted a simple, voluntary road maintenance agreement. No fines, no aesthetic cohesion, no clipboard patrols. We posted the truth about the lake and the dam and the ramp in 1 page of English instead of 60 pages of legal. People paid what was fair because it was theirs again. Power stopped being a threat and became a chore done together, like clearing branches after a storm. Not every moment was headline bright. Mr. Miller and I spent a Saturday building that wheelchair ramp. We sunk posts, checked slope, sanded rails smooth. It wasn't a protest, it was a correction. Between measurements, he told me how Linda had told him rules are rules, while his mother-in-law watched from behind glass. We tightened the last carriage bolt and stepped back. His wife wheeled her mom down and back up again, crying and laughing through both. That's the kind of inspection you don't frame because it frames you. When the county prosecutor filed charges, he didn't swing for spectacle. He spoke softly about paperwork as a public trust. The judge listened the way oak listens to wind. Guilty pleas came conspiracy, filing forged instruments, commercial bribery, probation for the notary who told the truth early, fines, restitution, and a ban on board service for the co-conspirators. Linda got time. Not much, not little, just enough to taste the end of the game she started. As she was let out, no one spat, no one clapped. People just stared down at the phones they once used to film her power and saw, at last, a mirror. If you're still here, I want you to take something more useful than outrage. Paper matters. Plat lines matter. Easements and assignments and who holds the declarant keys, that's the skeleton holding up every pretty porch swing. When someone shows up with a badge made of printouts and a voice full of certainty, ask for the deed. Ask for the statute. Ask for the signature that isn't a scan. Bullies count on noise. Bring them silence, a camera, and a county clerk who answers the phone. The house stands again. Mornings smell like coffee, not diesel dust. The lake breathes the way it did before the trucks. Some evenings I open the storm shelter door just to feel the cool air and remind myself we built wiser this time. Sometimes Stitch stops by and pretends not to check my joists. Sometimes Sheriff Miller sits on the steps and talks about grandkids. Sometimes I play the video on that thumb drive and let my wife's voice fill the room until the dog tilts his head like he's listening to the past. They thought power was paper you wave. They were wrong. Power is the ground you stand on and the truth you keep when someone tries to take it. If anyone has ever tried to roll a wrecking ball through your life, hear me plain. You don't have to be loud to win. Be exact. Be patient. Be the person who knows where the pins are set in the earth and what the signatures really mean. And if this hits you in the chest the way it did me, tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe. There are more stories coming, quiet victories, loud lessons, and the kind of ownership that can't be annexed by a vote scribbled at 2:27 a.m.